How will the Dallas Cowboys try to slow down Darren Waller on Sunday Night Football? All that and more this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, today we're answering Twitter questions for the final time before the season begins. We've got a lot of really good ones, so let's jump right into it. First question here from Kyle. How would you like to see the Cowboys try to cover Darren Waller, the newest weapon of the Giants? Is it Stephon Gilmore? Is it Ron Kearse? What do you want to see here?
Well, I think the best part about this for the Cowboys is that they have options, right? Like most teams don't have more than one really good option to try to attack covering a tight end, but the Cowboys have, one guy who is almost kind of specifically a tight end cover guy in Javon Kearse, and another, set of guys who you feel like, could rotate in and do some work there if you needed to. You mentioned Gilmore. I would say Mukwamu is another guy that you could consider here. Just some of your bigger guys. I mean, even Trayvon Diggs from occasionally, but they may mix it up just because Darren Waller is going to be the focus of the passing attack for the Giants. He is definitely considered to be their number one wide receiver. Like I said, I think Kearse is probably your first line of defense here. I mean, that's really where he specializes. But I think it's also really important, like we mentioned, to kind of mix it up, make sure multiple people are getting looks here. You're going to want to double them sometimes. So I think it's about mixing coverage and kind of keeping them guessing. But I would imagine if you're asking me to single out one guy who's going to be getting the lion's share of kind of coverage on here, I would imagine it would be Kearse.
I agree with you. I think it's going to be Kearse. We have seen Stephon Gilmore do this in the past. Bill Belichick has used them in different ways to stop tight ends, but if I had to guess, I think Dan Quinn is going to want to play a lot of cover one and some cover three looks, right? So that way they can keep as many players close to the box as possible to help stop Daniel Jones running the ball, help stop Saquon Barkley out of the backfield, help stop some of these slot receivers. So, and especially when you look at like the other outside receivers on this team, and it's Darius Slayton and Jalen Hyatt making his first appearance. Like I think the Cowboys probably feel pretty good about their corners and leaving them in an island. So then just put as many guys in the box as possible to try to disrupt Darren Waller, to put an extra linebacker in there that could just be in the way for Daniel Jones to consider. I've got to believe that's going to be Dan Quinn's strategy here.
Yeah, I think clog it up in the short area, make Daniel Jones throw the ball down the field in order to kind of move the football. That's just, it's not necessarily his game, and to kind of play him off his offhand a little bit. They did add some speed. That, like you mentioned, they added Jalen Hyatt. He can get up the field. Slayton obviously can get down the field, but I would much rather see them try to live and die throwing the ball down the field, because they felt like they couldn't get enough in the run game or in the short passing game to kind of consistently move the ball. That's the kind of situation where you're forcing them to hold to the ball. You're playing to the advantage of your superior coverage. That's how the Cowboys get the Giants into a negative gameplay.
And that's exactly right. They want Daniel Jones to hold onto the ball so their pass rushers can get to him and impact the play. But if you want more kind of breakdown of this Cowboy Giants matchup, especially from a Giants perspective, on tomorrow's show, the crossover show, I spoke with Patricia Traina. That's going to be up early Thursday morning on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. So make sure you check out that. Later, let's get to some other more Cowboys-related questions. A lot of people want to know about Tyler Smith. Somebody asked, on a scale of 1 to 10, how concerned are you about Tyler Smith? Hammy, who's the backup at left guard if Tyler Smith can't go? Just kind of an update of where we are with the Cowboys' second-year guard.
Well, it's being determined. I mean, he had an MRI yesterday, and they did confirm it was a strain. A strain usually, I mean, I'm not going to hold anybody to this because none of us are doctors, including the people that told us this information. But a strain is usually considered to be a grade 1 hamstring injury. This is something that he can play with depending on the severity. I mean, but let's not hold that to him. Like Mike McCarthy mentioned in the press conference this morning, this is his first hamstring injury, so they're still trying to feel it out exactly. Like how his body recovers from a hamstring injury. I tend to think that he probably will play. It will just, it will have an effect. It will be painful. I don't know that it's going to have, I mean, again, I don't know anything more than what we've seen reported, but if it's just a grade 1, hopefully that's something he will play with. It'll be painful a little bit, but it shouldn't have a major effect on his ability to play.
We also mentioned on yesterday's podcast, like offensive linemen and defensive linemen, for the most part, can play with a hamstring injury more often and more regular than a corner can or a wide receiver can. Like if this was Trayvon Diggs that suffered this injury on Monday, he's not playing on Sunday. Like it's just not happening.
I also think it's worth noting that Tyler Smith is like 22 years old.
22.
I think that makes a huge difference. Like young players bounce back from these kind of things very quickly. This is not, Cooper Kupp, 30 years old, having a reoccurring hamstring injury. So I tend to think that he can play, and if he doesn't play, I think what we're doing is we're having a conversation about, is it TJ Bass? Is it Adoga? Is it Asim Richards?
Who do you want it to be?
I think I said before that, if he's healthy, Adoga makes sense, simply because he's a veteran. He has some experience there. But I also think that TJ Bass makes a lot of sense because they have some power there. I think Richards is more of the upside play. I like Richards, and I wouldn't be upset with him at all playing. But I think if we're talking about for week 1, who's got the power to kind of hold up inside against those defensive tackles, I definitely would rather have the veteran or the undrafted free agent who I know is specialty in power. So that's probably my take there.
Yeah, we've seen some pretty bad guards start for the Cowboys over the years in week 1 between Phil Costa started one year. Montre Holland was actually not too bad. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones. Oh man, they've had some really bad guards play.
Old Brian Waters when he.
I didn't mind that one. I didn't.
No,
mind
he wasn't
Brian
bad, but it's just kind of throwing in like guys that have like. Listen, beyond
Corey
that
Proctor.
too, we did have an examination on Cowboys offensive line hamstring injuries the week before we play week 1 games. There's just something going on that needs to be examined there, I think.
Yeah. So the good news is that he is going to be working off to the side with Britt Brown, which at least tells you like he can do something. It's not like he's laid up in bed or anything like that. He's still able to be out there on the field rehabbing. Same with Donovan Wilson. Same with Sam Williams. Those are the 3 players that we're keeping an eye on for week 1. Of those 3, who do you think is the most likely to play this week?
I think Tyler probably. I mean, again, we don't know the severity of these, and maybe the answer is actually Donovan Wilson, simply because I think Donovan's may have been the most serious of these injuries, but he's also had the longest to recover from it. So it's very likely that Donovan is just on schedule and this is where he is. So probably one of those 2.
All right, let's talk about Dak Prescott, who has throughout his career played really, really well against the Giants. How will he perform here in week 1? We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Harry's. No matter why you shave, Harry's has you covered with the best shave of your life at a price that you're absolutely going to love. From their legendary high-quality razors to skin products like their face wash or their hydrating lotion, Harry's gives you a premium shave without the premium price tag. Get better quality and a better price than other razors when you get Harry's delivered directly to your door. They sent me a box probably 3 weeks ago now, and I absolutely love it. I can't tell you how good the experience is. There's really no reason not to try Harry's, because right now they're offering a no-risk trial. Don't like your shave? No worries. Don't even have to send it back. It's on them. Plus, Harry's has the highest customer satisfaction in the shaving industry. It's absolutely phenomenal. Get your best shave ever this summer with Harry's razors and skincare products. Get a $13 starter set for just $3 at harrys.com/NFL. That is harrys.com/NFL for a $3 starter set. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We want to thank you for making us your first listen every day. The Locked On Ultimate NFL Season Preview is here. This 7-episode extravaganza brings opinions, analysis, and plenty of debate from all 32 of our local Locked On NFL hosts with some added insights from our national experts. It's a can't-miss series before the season kicks off. Catch every episode on Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Landon, we've got a question here about Dak, who, again, has played really, really well against the Giants in his career. Do you expect Dak to be more passive in this game, or do you expect him to come out pretty aggressive? You know that there's been a lot of talk this offseason about his interceptions. Do you think he's going to be more conservative to make sure he doesn't turn the ball over?
Well, let's consider who we're playing week 1, because I think that matters, right? The Giants and their defensive coordinator, who's Wink Martindale, and Wink Martindale has never met a zero blitz that he doesn't love, emphatically. Mm-hmm. So I think that because of the aggressive nature of the defensive coordinator you're facing this week, you're going to see an aggressive Dak because he is going to be attacking the blitz. He's going to be attacking where they are occupied. And this is honestly one of the reasons that Dak has had such great success against these kind of defenses, because he is really, really good against the blitz. He's one of the best in the entire league against the blitz. So I tend to think that in general, Dak is not going to be more passive. I think that kind of talking point, is being driven by the fact that he had a lot of interceptions this last season, and I don't think changing Dak's demeanor is the solution to getting less interceptions. So, or it may cause you to get less interceptions, but that's not the way that we want to change it, because we want him to continue to be aggressive. So I tend to think that Dak is going to come out and play the normal amount of aggressive as you would normal season, and then maybe a little bit extra because of the fact that they're playing Martindale, who's going to come after him pretty heavily, and Dak's going to attack right back.
I also think he's going to have to be aggressive, because I just have my doubts about this run game early on in the season. And we see this almost every year. Like, typically teams really struggle to run the ball in September as they're getting used to the new offensive line, as they're getting used to the physicality. And when you've got Tony Pollard coming back from an injury, you might have a backup left guard in this thing. And the Giants have a really good front. Like, that's one of the things they can do really well, is stop the run. So there's a chance you might get into a lot of 3rd and 7s and 3rd and 8s. And that's where Dak is going to have to be aggressive. On the other side, I think he's going to want to be aggressive because he's got 2 rookie corners that he's going to be attacking on the outside in favorable matchups with probably Michael Gallup on Deonte Banks, and then probably Brandon Cooks on Trey Hawkins, a 6th-round pick. Like, it almost doesn't make sense for Dak to play passive against a Wink Martindale defense.
Yeah, and again, like, playing passive is not the solution here.
No.
Like, I understand that this is a talking point about trying to reduce interceptions. Reducing interceptions is not as important as being aggressive with the football down the field. No. And again, the interception total, go back and look at, turnover worthy plays, and Dak had a string of bad luck. I think he was somewhere in the middle of the pack in turnover worthy plays, but led the league in interceptions. Like, that's bad turnover luck.
I also believe, I'll have to double check this, but he had 15 interceptions last year. I think that was either the lowest or the 2nd lowest total in NFL history, is to lead the history, lead the league in interceptions. So everybody says, he led the league in interceptions and he missed 5 games. Yes, it's true. But there's been other years, most recently, like 2021 or 2020. James had 30. Right? Like, this is 15 is an unusually low number for an interception leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'm not concerned about the interceptions overall, especially in the context of whether my quarterback is throwing the football aggressively. That's more important, whether or not he does that or versus successfully. That's the other thing too, is he's successful at throwing the ball down the field when the interceptions don't happen. And those plays more than make up for the turnovers, than make up for them.
Next question from @Americas_team. He wants to know, if the Cowboys lose on Sunday, I love the attitude already.
All right, guys.
What do you think the biggest reason might end up being? I got my reason.
Let's hear
just rust, right? Like, they're one of the few teams that just didn't play any starters in week 1. And typically that leads to slower starts to the year, but hopefully it could have a longer term impact if you keep all your guys healthy. Like there's just a chance that they come out and they're rusty and you have guys dropping passes and miscommunication and coverage breakdowns. Like I think more than anything, and we saw that, happen a little bit last year against Tampa Bay as well, they could just look really rusty on both sides of the ball.
Yeah. I mean, I think the idea in general that September football is preseason football, so it means that, you see a lot of really good teams lose football games because it's just like it doesn't feel like all the talent rises to the top the way it does once the season kind of has gone a ways away, right? There's a certain amount of just like the teams feeling each other out in the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season.
I was going to say, use the two teams last year they were in the championship games. The Bengals started out the year 0-2. They had 5 turnovers against Pittsburgh in week 1 at home. And then they played the Cowboys in week 2 and lost to Cooper Rush, right? Like they played terrible the first 2 weeks of the season. Or take the 49ers, who they lost to the Bears, the worst team in football last year in week 1. And then they turned around and played the Broncos, maybe the second worst team in football, and lost to them in that game. Jimmy Garoppolo ran out of the back of the end zone. So we saw like super, super elite teams last year come out of the gate really slow. Like I think that's just going to be more and more common in the 17-game season.
Yeah. And I think, in general, it's important to not kind of jump to conclusions based on especially the very first game, right? It's really, this is the teams kind of learning themselves a little bit, figuring out what they're good at. The first real opportunity to be playing real football for a lot of these starters. So, I think it's really about fun. Surviving it.
It's really fun to jump to conclusions and panic after one game a season. I'm telling you, it gets people riled up on Twitter. It's a blast.
Absolutely. and they will, and no matter what, they will. So it'll be fun to see how they do it.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about the Cowboys kind of changing philosophy when it comes to draft picks. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Gametime is the fastest and the easiest way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over tickets and start getting hyped for all the fun you'll have. I've talked about Gametime a bunch on this podcast. I absolutely love it. It's what I use to buy tickets. My favorite part is it shows you exactly how much you'll pay with all the taxes and fees included. And they'll show you a picture of exactly what your seats are going to look like, so you won't be surprised at all. It is the fastest growing ticket app in the country for a reason. The tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your email. You can buy your tickets in a matter of seconds, just 2 taps and you're in. Snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Landon, our last question here is a really good one from Dan, and I think he noticed something that you and I have noticed. He says, Dallas has already traded away their 4th, 5th, and 6th round picks in next year's draft. Does this suggest that they may value these late round picks less due to the success of finding undrafted players who contribute or something else?
Yes, but I also think it is showing you the value and how much they value the new analytics team that they brought in, right? Like clearly the changes. Look, there's 2 things. It seems like since they've started, I hired John Park and they've built this team, there has been 2 things that has happened. One, we've seen an increase in a couple more trades, right? It's specifically what we're talking about here, these late round flops for picks.
Well, how many trades have they made over the last, basically midway through last year? Because they traded for Jonathan Hankins, they traded for Stephon Gilmore, they traded for Brandon Cooks, they traded up for Eric Scott, which we'll see. Am I missing any others? They traded for Trey Lance.
For Trey Lance. Yeah. And did they trade for Gilmore too?
Yeah, Gilmore. So Gilmore, Cooks, Trey Lance, Hankins. That's 4 players, and none of them cost you more than a 4th round pick.
Yeah, and Hankins, Hankins obviously counts, but Hankins happened before Park and some of those guys. So I tend to think, and then also the other thing that I wanted to mention is all these contracts that are being signed. I mean, I think that a lot of this, would have probably happened because you have a lot of people up, but the fact that they're getting these contracts signed early and team friendly deals, I think it has a lot to do with the kind of the move of the analytics department into player personnel and player management. This is a very analytical way of looking at this, flipping late round picks for proven veteran leaderships that are in contract situations that make it not palatable for their current team. That's finding that kind of area to kind of exploit is how frankly the Eagles got built the team the way they did. So I think being able to use this tool of trading late round picks to kind of pry veterans that are valuable from situations that are not working for the team or for the veteran. I think it's a great way to accentuate what you've already got in your ability to kind of draft and develop, right? I think it's a difficult balance that needs to be struck, because if you're drafting and developing, obviously the draft picks are your lifeblood. But I think that there is a way to do that and be smart, and try to leverage getting the comp picks and to refill your coffers once you traded them away. This is just smart, team building, and it's just another way that more modern front offices are getting good players onto their teams. It's great to see the Cowboys kind of finally taking advantage of it. And
we're also seeing the Cowboys are just cutting more draft picks than ever because they have a lot of talent in the middle of the roster. Like a guy like Jabril Cox got cut. Neville Gallimore made the roster, but he was kind of on the borderline. They trade away Kelvin Joseph. Like they're moving on from a lot of these players by year 3 if they're not panning out. So I think the value of those picks has just gone down because there's just not enough roster spots for them. At the same time, it's not like they're not going to have any picks on day 3. They're either going to trade down from round 1, round 2, but also they could make in-season trades. They're also expected to get some sort of compensation for Dalton Schultz and Connor McGovern. So it's not like you and I are going to be able to take off the Saturday of the draft because we know the Cowboys aren't going to make a pick. Like that's not going to be the case. I do want to mention the contracts because I thought that was really interesting. That's something you mentioned. For a couple of their younger players, Terrence Steele and Trayvon Diggs, they signed both of those players to 5-year deals. And it just gives you so much flexibility. And by the time you get to year 4 and year 5 of those deals, there's no guaranteed money left. And when you look at like where the salary cap could be by those times, those could be those might be below market value by a significant margin, and you can move money around. And even players like Malik Hooker and Donovan Wilson, who, guys that were a little bit older, because I think Donovan Wilson was an older rookie coming out. You get those guys on 3-year deals where maybe historically the Cowboys have only given those guys 1 or 2-year deals. Same thing. You can move some money around in the margins a little bit to help you retain some of your talent.
Yeah, and then I also think it's worth pointing out, because we haven't really discussed this yet, they're doing other stuff, like they just reduced Neville Gallimore's salary by $1.5 million. They're doing that despite the fact that they are still like, according to Joey Ikes, who I follow on a lot of this stuff, I think they're still 10 million or maybe even 12 million beneath the spending floor, which to me reads like I wonder how close they are with this Dak Prescott contract
or the CD one,
or both. Like I just want, because they're underneath the contract floor. They're still making deals. They're moving money the other direction still, like to get more room. To me, that reads like, hey, we know that we're about to have a huge number hit our books. We're trying to prepare it, or they are getting themselves so that they can just sign one more deal to get them barely over the spending floor, and then trying to roll over a huge amount of money of cap space into next year so that they can afford to pay for Parsons.
Just to be clear, and I am not a salary cap expert by any means, there's a difference in what we're talking about here between actual cash spending and salary cap space. Every team is required to spend, and I don't know the number offhand, X amount of dollars, actual cash, every single year.
Million or something.
Yeah. And the Cowboys are below that. Like they've got to start spending some actual cash this year, despite, not having a ton of salary cap in the future. So that's why you're seeing Terrence Steele get like a huge signing bonus right now to lower kind of the cap hits over the next couple of years, right? And that's why we think a deal is ultimately going to be pretty close, because if you don't spend that money, I think it either gets spread out to other teams, or I'm not exactly, there's a punishment.
There is a punishment, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the punishment to get. Sorry, I apologize.
The Cowboys, I wonder why, because the Cowboys have never been anywhere near the cash spending floor before.
Right.
But yeah.
But and this is typically what happens when you have a lot of really good players on cheap deals for a long time. It's just you're not giving up $40 or $50 million as a signing bonus to any player. They just haven't had to do that all that frequently over the last 4 or 5 years, and that's why they're in this position.
Yeah, and again, they're making moves to try to extend to get beneath that. To me, they're setting up pieces for a big deal. It seems like. So we'll see how that all plays out. But they got to get above the cash spending floor, I think, for the game, right?
And this isn't a thing of like the Cowboys don't have the money to do this. I know.
No.
When I'm covering the Raiders, when the Khalil Mack contract came up, they had the cap space to pay Khalil Mack. They literally didn't have the cash to give him a $40 million signing bonus, which he asked for. That's why they had to trade him. That's not the issue for the Cowboys.
They literally didn't have the cash to give Chandler Jones a spare key to the locker room.
Well, that's a different issue, but yes, more or less. Listen, this is not Locked On Raiders.
This is not Locked On Raiders. But
if you want to listen to a train wreck, go listen to Locked On Raiders with our your boy Q. He does a fantastic job. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every day. Again, everydayers on tomorrow's show, we have a crossover show with Patricia Traina, who's very excited about this Giants team.
Yeah.
Let me tell you that. So make sure you tune in for that. It's on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. And we'll see you guys next time.